Welcome back to the show, everybody. My name is Jet McLaughlin. This is Sustainable Culture. It's a podcast about exploring the relationship between humans, society, our psyche, and the natural world. It's good to have you back. Last time we were joined by Adrian Gallo of the Idaho Conservation League for a focus on aquifers, water quality, and soil health, and how agriculture affects those things in Idaho. I felt very fortunate to have the space to get a little more academic than usual since I'm an environmental science student. It is so encouraging to speak to professionals in that field to get kind of a validation of what it is I'm studying and where it is I'm going with that. It was a very educational discussion that you don't want to miss, so give it a listen if you haven't done so already. Coming up this coming Sunday, November 10th, is our next community trash pickup. I can't believe it's already the week of. We're going to be meeting at the Avista Pavilion at Tubbs Hill in downtown Coeur d'Alene. It's going to be happening at 11 o'clock in the morning. We will have free coffee and bagels from our very generous sponsors at Doma Coffee and Back Pocket Bakery. Thank you, guys. Safe Passage will also be participating. They'll have a booth there, and they'll be helping during the pickup itself. Follow the Instagram at Sustainable Culture Online or find us on Facebook to see the event page with info on where to find us. Everybody's invited. It will be chilly, I am hearing and seeing on the forecast here, so make sure to dress appropriately for the weather. Now, this week, we're meeting with two people who work for Hospice of North Idaho, voted 2024's Best Hospice Care Provider by Business Journal of North Idaho. Megan Ryan, who's a communications specialist, and Eric Ladwig, the executive director, both joined me for an interview regarding their work in hospice care and its importance in our community. Hospice care is one of those things that means a lot to many of us for a lot of different reasons, but I'll wait to divulge completely because we get into all that during the discussion itself. A couple of cool things that we didn't end up having time to feature, though. First off, if you follow Hospice of North Idaho, you'll have heard of their Telephone of the Wind. I love this idea. It's a disconnected phone booth situated on a 6-acre campus designed for reflection, healing, and remembrance of lost ones. This is an ingenious outlet for those who like to share a message with their lost friends or family, giving them an opportunity to say things they never got to say, or even as a way of visiting those no longer present in our lives. They host a camp helping kids with grief called Camp Kaniksu, which we address in great detail during the episode. The Schneidmiller House is a newer facility which offers more acute, comprehensive care services for patients in a home-like environment with garden areas, a lounging area, and a big fireplace. It's just a very cozy atmosphere. They're also doing a lighting ceremony coming up here soon. All of these things, you'll want to head to hospiceofnorthidaho.org for more information on it and full details because they seriously offer the most amazing care and have the biggest hearts of anyone in any medical-related field I have ever come across, and that is not hyperbole. Well, let's get to it then. Let's talk to these folks. This is episode 32, Big, Heavy, Happy Hearts, the honor of hospice care. All right, so we're sitting with Megan, Eric. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So we're here at 10-6 once again. I have recorded a few episodes here. This place is charming as all get out. I always take a second to promote 10-6, partially because I work here, so it's super selfish promotion, but also because TJ and Mama Jill are just fantastic people. So we're sitting here in the tea room. We're going to talk about, I figured this was a nice, bright atmosphere to talk about gosh, would you say a mixed topic, if you will, as far as moods of hospice care? I think there's all kinds of stuff we're going to address here with that. Light, dark, all the places in between. So hospice care is something, I will just say right off the top, is very near and dear to my heart and experience in life, because some people might know this, some people might not. My mom passed away in a hospice care place, and gosh, I always appreciated hospice care. My mom actually got involved in hospice care work for a little while, briefly, and then ended up kind of switching interests. She was going towards nursing for a while, but never until she was admitted into a hospice care place did I ever see the importance of it as big as I did, and just how wonderful shining examples of people the nurses are. It blew my mind. I remember personally thanking each and every nurse that I saw working there, because it was just mind-blowing to me. They're like angels on earth. I really don't understand how they do what they do. And, Eric, we'll talk to you a bit about that here in a bit. So before we get into that, let's start with some of the basics. Megan, we'll start with you. What got you interested in the hospice world as a profession in the first place?
Good question. So what got me interested was I had received my bachelor's in communications through Lewis Clark State College, going through NIC, cool. Kind of a hybrid program. I had been working at Heritage Health, so I'm familiar with the nonprofit healthcare world. And kind of throughout my earlier 20s, my mom was a hospice social worker. And I never really thought about it much when she was doing that care. I knew that it was long hours. I knew that she traveled a lot, drove around a lot, and was able to provide care and comfort for families and patients. But I never really understood the extent of it. In my childhood, my grandmother had dementia, and she ended up going to a facility. And my mother was the caregiver for her primarily, and so she was, taking care of her, and I kind of saw the end stages of life with my grandmother at a young age.
Wow.
So then, flash forward to after graduating with my bachelor's degree and kind of wanting to look for a job in the communication field, I saw that Hospice of North Idaho was hiring for a community outreach position. So that would entail going out into the community, spreading the word about Hospice of North Idaho, really engaging businesses in the community, bringing awareness and education out to the community, things like that. So I was able to use my degree in communications to be able to, further myself in that role. And so I was able to, interview and get the position. And so I've been with Hospice of North Idaho for 5.5 years now. My role has evolved since then. I've dabbled in quite a few things and wear many hats, but primarily I do the full extent of internal and external communications and marketing for Hospice in North Idaho.
Awesome.
So that's a little bit about me.
That's great. I didn't
expounded a little bit on your question there, but
that's intentional. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that about your experience with your grandma and with dementia. I would love to open up on that a little later.
Sure.
That is really wonderful information. Eric, how about you? How'd you get in here?
Oh gosh. Well, I used to be a construction worker, believe it or not. And
really?
Yeah, my father was a physician, a labor and delivery, LD, OBGYN physician. I grew up in the Army, moved around a lot, and everybody used to always ask me, are you going to grow up to be a doctor like your dad? And I'd look at my dad's schedule he'd worked, and I'd look at the kind of work that he was doing, and I'd say, no, I'm not interested, not even at all, not even a little bit. So I got into construction. I ended up cutting off the end of one of my fingers, and my wife said, it's time for you to change careers. So I went back to school in my early 30s, and I got my bachelor's degree in nursing and started working in intensive care down in Pocatello, southeast Idaho. And while I was working down there, I was in a conversation with one of my aunts who had just retired as a hospice nurse. She'd worked in hospice for many years.
Yeah.
She was one of my favorite people in the world. And she said, "So Eric, when are you going to start working in hospice nursing?" And I looked at her and said, "Are you crazy? I have no interest in that whatsoever." I had a very exciting job. Intensive care is really, there's a lot of adrenaline. There's a lot of fast decision making. There's a lot of complexity. And I thought, why would I ever do hospice? I'm doing this,
Wow.
I started into my master's program for my nurse practitioner, and I realized I couldn't continue to work that schedule while I was, doing this level of education. So I took a job in home health and started doing home health nursing. Figured out pretty quick that wasn't really my fit. It wasn't something I really liked. And so I was considering changing something, and somebody that had worked in the ICU with me was a hospice nurse with us and said, "Why don't you come check out hospice care?" And I thought, oh no, this is going back to my...
So it came up again,
Oh no. But I was like, no, I'll come check it out. Why not? So I went and shadowed, and I liked what I saw.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't have anything to lose. I was looking at changing to do something else anyways, so why not this? I had 2.5 years left for my master's, and at the time, it was right before COVID. And so I switched over, and within about 8 months, I remember going home to my wife one day and said, if I wasn't already a year into my master's program and already invested all this time and work, I would do this job the rest of my life as a nurse case manager.
Oh, wow.
Doing hospice care.
Yeah.
The kind of interactions I got to have with families and with patients, the kinds of education that I got to do was unbelievable. I'd never experienced that kind of connection on a professional level and on a human level. And so it was, for me, it was like, I know what I want to do the rest of my life.
Wow.
So as I finished up the rest of my my master's degree, I knew that I was going to continue to work in the hospice environment. There was no question in my mind. So moving up here to North Idaho area, I knew what I wanted to do. I just had to find the right place to do it. And when I was introduced to Hospice of North Idaho, I found that not only had I discovered a place that did the work that I was passionate about in hospice care, but I found a place that did it in a different way than I'd ever imagined. Because being a nonprofit, being community owned, and having these different programs in place that give back to the community, it wasn't just about caring for the patients and their loved ones. It was about doing it at a much larger scope in the context of being part and owned by and accountable to the community. And that changed everything for me.
Yeah.
And so, being able to move into that realm and, working as a palliative nurse in hospice here, working as a nurse practitioner in hospice here, gave me a different sense for hospice care and gave me a different sense for how it can be done than I had experienced even before when I fell in love with hospice to begin with. So, moving into the position that I'm in now in this administrative role has been challenging in some ways because I've had to step away from some of those things that I truly, truly love about working in hospice.
Yeah.
Which is sitting at the bedside, holding the hands of the people I'm caring for, helping walk with people through this most intense and most emotionally exhaustive process of end of life.
On everyone.
Yeah. So I miss aspects of that. Every once in a while, I still go back and help support our nurse practitioners and their team. And I get to have conversations with families, but I get to have them on a different level now, in a different way. I get to go out into the community and talk about what we do and talk about how influential it is and how impactful it is in people's lives and how people get to be a part of it now, not just when their loved one is, facing that very distressful and very dire place of being at end of life. We have people that come in from the community and support us through volunteerism, through donations, through business partnerships, through all these different things, and contribute to this kind of care and this net that we create to support people long before they have to deal with that kind of complexity. And so it's a beautiful thing to be a part of it this way too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's very clear that you two are passionate about what it is you're doing, not just the field. The field itself is so important, so necessary for culture, our society in general. So thank you both for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I would say too, in my role, I, have different experiences than Eric, obviously. But for me, I think something that really sparks my passion with what I do is being able to connect with the community and hear their stories.
Yeah.
And I've had some experiences with families that are involved in our services, and even some patients, to be able to capture on video and photograph some of the end-of-life moments that they have together has been really impactful for me, and it's filled my cup. But also just hearing, the impact that hospice has had on families in our community is also really, really neat experience to have.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we're going to kind of expound on that a bit after the break. I'm really interested to hear some specific stories and things like, that, as far as how the community has been kind of interactive with you regarding that. So keep that stuff in mind. I would love to address that in a bit. Before we get there, Eric, we'll start with you on this one. I know you haven't been on the hospice nurse level for a little bit, as you mentioned, but could you give folks, there's a lot of people that I know for me, before my mom was interested in hospice care, I didn't know much about it at all, really. Yeah. I didn't understand the difference between hospice and hospital, some basics of it. So could you give us a bit of info on a ground level of what is the day-to-day often like for a hospice care nurse? What are some things that are not uncommon? What's a usual, I don't know if there is such a thing as a usual day in a hospice care.
Well, you'd like to think there is, but you're absolutely right. There's not. You might. I look back at my case managing days, and you think you've got your whole week planned out. I'm going to go see Susie Q on this day and Freddie G on this day, and I'm going to, And then as the week progresses, everything changes. You have new people coming on to your caseload that you're going out and you're meeting and building a relationship with. You have people that you've been taking care of a long time or a short time who end up passing away midway through the week, and so you're helping the family a lot when they're at that stage. So you have to step it up, and you're in the house a lot, and you're talking and helping with taking care of them after they've deceased. We go in and we help watch the body and talk to the family and help communicate with the funeral home. And these things can happen at a moment's notice. One of the incredible things about the place that we work now is we have a very robust support system in place for our nurses. So I guess the question then is, okay, what kind of nurse are we talking about, right? So a case managing nurse, what you're looking at on the day-to-day is you're responsible for overseeing a patient's plan of care. You're responsible for coordinating and collaborating with the family regarding their needs and working with the social worker that's going to be in the home with them. And then, reporting back and bringing back to the physician and the nurse practitioners, the medical director, what's going on with that person. So the case manager is very busy in regards to the management of care and education, helping families or patients start new medications, monitoring the effectiveness of those medications, making sure it's doing what it's supposed to do and not causing other problems. So there's a lot of that oversight and management piece. They also oversee when we have aides going into the homes that help with personal cares, bathing and hair and nails and all that stuff that's extremely important for people as they become less independent and able to do that on their own. Yeah. The nurse is responsible for oversight of the care aides work and making sure that they know the right things that they're supposed to be doing when they're in there caring for that particular individual and what their needs are. So that's what a case managing nurse does. We also have emergent and admission nurses. Okay. And their job is predominantly taking any referrals that we're getting and going out and admitting people onto the services, educating them about what hospice is, and just kind of getting the ball rolling and helping the team to understand what the picture is and what's going on with that person, because it's just about every person is going to be a unique situation. Oh, yeah. And so they have to help establish what that looks like right off the bat. Yeah. They also help out with emergent needs. So that person that has a fall at 3:00 in the afternoon, their case manager may not be available to go see them right in that moment. So we staff emergent nurses to be able to run out and take care of that person and settle out whatever is going on and help them get into a safe place. And so we have people that do that kind of work. We also have triage nurses. They sit in the office and they're on the phone all day long. They're processing referrals. They're handling phone calls of families and patients that have needs that are calling into the office and saying, hey, this just happened, or I don't know what to do with this medication. These guys can pick up the phone and talk them through whatever is going on, and then hand off to those emergent nurses if there's ongoing needs that we need to follow up with an in-person visit. So, but really, what my experience was that particularly drew me into hospice, that was so different than what I'd done before in an acute care setting, was the relationships that come out of these kind of care environments. So I wasn't taking care of somebody in a hospital room. I wasn't taking care of someone in a well, sometimes we do in facilities, but when we go in and we step into that room to take care of this person, we're in their environment. We're not on our turf. We're in their home, in their bedroom, in their bathroom. We're in their residential living facility. We're in their skilled nursing facility. We're in their space. And what I observed was the person's interaction with me as a caregiver changed when I was in their place, and they weren't in the hospital where I happened to work. They became more open. They became more trusting. They became really dependent on this relationship that I had with them, and they had a lot of confidence in me. And that placed a huge obligation on me to do everything I could to manage that care in the way that was truly going to meet their wants and desires and their needs.
So is it fair to say there's a huge focus on their perceived safety in that environment?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much trust in that relationship.
And you have to establish that in a short amount of time.
You do, yeah. And when you look at somebody's physical, emotional, sociologic progression through life, there's a pretty dramatic reversal of all of those things when somebody's approaching end of life.
Yeah.
You look at how dependent a newborn baby is for all things: nutrition, physical care, emotional needs, all those things. A brand newborn infant is 100% dependent on all that. And the reality is, as people approach end of life, especially with disease processes that are very slow evolving, we see a regression because they get back to that place where they're dependent for all of those needs again, just like they were when they were an infant. And so the same kind of trust that a person with the responsibility of caring for an infant needs to, have that in place. It's the same thing at end of life. Yeah. And that person is trusting us with the most fragile and most vulnerable needs that they're going to have ever. Yeah. So it's actually a privilege to be a person that gets to do that.
Yeah. That's just what I was thinking. It seems like there's this strong kind of underlying sense of the privilege of that presence in, every hospice care worker I've ever met. Yeah. I mean, there is sort of this shared, it's like they feel honored just to be there. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
Definitely. I mean, we kind of talk about it within our own organization, but anyone that goes into hospice care, regardless of what you do, whether it's, we have janitorial or maintenance, we have housekeeping, we have social work, we have spiritual care chaplains, and we have nurses, and then we have the whole administrative side too, amongst other jobs, and volunteers as well. And so all of that, we kind of say that when someone works within this realm, that they have the hospice heart. And it truly takes someone with passion and empathy and really looking at a person as a person, and not just, this is just my job. Yeah. So anyone that we've noticed that comes and really dives into the passion that we have, they have the hospice heart for that. Hospice heart. Yeah.
I like that term a lot. Yeah. Yeah, because it's a specific, it has to be a specific thing. It's making me think of, we've all, not all of us, hopefully, but a lot of us have been to the ER, and you mentioned intensive care, and we've met those folks, I'll just say nurses, and doctors too, who some of them are kind of just clocked in for the day, and it's like everyone just kind of goes by, and it's like you have unit number 1, unit number 2, and that's for whatever reason. I don't know if everyone's got a different background. Maybe it's been a hard day, maybe they just watched someone pass away. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like that. But then you also notice there are those people who look at you and see you in the work that they do. And honestly, that doesn't just have to be in a medical related field. It's in any field.
Yeah.
Working here at 10-6, that's happened to me before with guests here. I've had people just like look and peer into my soul and go, "Who are you?" and really want to talk about really personal stuff. And it's a joy and very rare to meet folks like that. So I can only imagine this hospice heart phenomenon you're talking about is like, oh, we got him. That's a person. It must be a treat to actually get to that point when you meet folks.
I mean, I think that everyone that interacts with our mission, which is with open hearts and expertise, we serve the seriously ill and those touched by loss. I think everyone will somehow no matter what they do in our organization, they will experience that mission. And I've seen it firsthand. I've experienced it. Working at hospice has completely changed my life and changed my view on life. And I know what I want at the end, kind of deal. So it's really impactful work. And I think everyone who works with us is honored to provide that for others.
Yeah, I think what you're kind of speaking to is that whole element of human connection.
100%. Absolutely.
Is. And you can
a very raw, kind of primal connection that we get.
It is. Yeah. And everybody, each individual is going to interact with that their own unique way. And so what Megan's speaking to is there really are people who, one of the best ways that they just intuitively are able to establish that human connection is by providing care, or is by being with somebody when they're in that fragile place or when they're at that end of life place. And those are the people that tend to gravitate to our field of work, and that's why obviously there was something about me and the way that I was that my aunt could see all those years ago that I couldn't see. I didn't really comprehend that, but she could. And that's why she knew. She called it out years before I ever found myself in the hospice field. She knew that this was the kind of environment that would create avenues for me to interact in that human connection process with people that would be gratifying to me, and I could help to create a gratifying experience for others around me as well.
I just spoke with a nurse today that had left for a period of time to go just visit other avenues of her career field.
Oh, yeah.
And she had said that, she went out and she tried different things, but hospice is her home. And coming back to hospice, it fills her cup. She didn't feel that anywhere else. And I think that speaks to a lot of people for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's an intuitive no, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
And KNOW, intuitive no.
Yeah.
Well, let's, I want to address, you'd mentioned how meeting so many folks and that human connection, that kind of stuff, Megan, I can't imagine in your position how often you come in contact with community-based work. And I want to talk about that some more, but we're going to take a quick break first, and then I want to get into that. So We'll be right back. And we're back. They're still here.
We're still here.
We haven't left yet. We haven't scared anyone away.
We're not screaming or anything.
Doing great so far. Now, before we get into the community-based work that you do, Megan, you had mentioned a couple of things during the break that I think sounded great. Let's address some touching points, some common misconceptions about hospice care, some clarifiers. I love that you brought that up because, as I mentioned there was a time where I didn't know the difference between hospice and hospitals, how they were different. People see the end of their lives at either one, and it's not like an either or situation like that, but there is definitely a lot of gaps in knowledge as far as hospice care.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right on that. So why don't I let you take that away? What are some things that you have for us that are helpful to folks as far as hospice care in general, some of the clarifiers, some misconceptions and things like that?
You know, when I'm out in the community, I hear a lot from people that view hospice and end-of-life care as a taboo topic. When speaking about death in our culture, a lot of people aren't comfortable speaking about it, even though it's just as important as a birth. Death is inevitable, and everyone goes through it. It's just whether or not people are comfortable discussing it and how they view it. You know, there's a lot of people that have had traumatic experiences involving death. There's a lot of thoughts around death that people are just uneducated about. And so our goal within hospice is to, you know, of course, educate people on hospice care, but also at the end stages of life.
Yeah. I've even noticed, to support your point, like ever since losing my mom some years ago, and whenever I've experienced that, it makes you either more comfortable or not, but I have chosen to lean into that and become more comfortable with it. But I have noticed ever since going through a lot of death and therefore grieving that I've been much more open to talk about it. And it's not until I start talking about it that I notice the squirminess and the, oh, not this, that I get a lot of times. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot. So I'm just supporting your point. I've certainly noticed that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, you know, the important piece to it is understanding what end of life care looks like. There's different elements to it. We have, within our hospice, we have palliative care, which is a supportive piece to hospice, but it's how do I explain this?
Well, I could
you help me here.
Yeah. So palliative care really is a concept of care, and what it is it's not focusing on the curative measures, but focusing on relieving symptoms. Okay, and so when we talk about, in our world, we talk about sometimes the palliative care continuum, which is actually something that starts clear back when somebody's first diagnosed with a disease of whatever type it is, whether it's heart, lungs, cancer, whatever that might look like, they're going to start getting treatments. But over the course of that disease, as it progresses and as it's going to worsen over time, they're going to need more and more support with managing their symptoms. That symptom management piece is what we call palliative care. Okay? And that starts clear back when that person first starts having a chronic or complex illness, and then that continues all the way through end of life. Okay?
Eric, what would you say, like, an example of complex illness would be?
Well, you know, complex illness wouldn't be like, hey, I've got some allergies, or, you know, even like when somebody is first diagnosed with a chronic disease like COPD, oftentimes when they're in the very early stages, they're not a really complex illness at that point. But as that illness worsens over time and they're going to become more dependent on receiving medical support, medications to manage it, it becomes more complex.
I see.
And so palliative care is going to have more and more importance the further along that trajectory that person is going down the road. Where oftentimes we see that people miss out on something that would be really beneficial is as they're going down that road with treatment, whether it's their cancer, whether it's a heart condition, whatever that might be, they're going to be going in and seeing their specialists. They're going to be going in and seeing their primary care doctor, and they're going to see them more and more frequently because they're going to need additional support. Oftentimes, because those guys are specialized in those particular things, oftentimes what we miss is that they don't have somebody that's a specialist in the field of symptom management to help with that particular component. And so palliative care is meant to fill that gap, and it can be done while somebody's getting active treatment.
Okay.
So that can be off and on. Palliative care is part of that picture over the course of years before somebody even looks like they'd be having the hospice conversation. And that's something that gets missed in our culture a lot, particularly in our area. Yeah.
Interesting.
So hospice is the very end piece of that palliative care continuum. This is when somebody has reached a point because of the chronicity or the severity of their illness, or because they've had a rapid kind of a decline for whatever reason, whatever that might look like, where they've been given less than a 6-month prognosis. The doctor says, given this illness, if without anything changing, I could see you passing away in 6 months. Okay. That person technically is eligible for hospice at that point. But going on to hospice is essentially when a person has felt like, I no longer either want or there are no longer available to me treatments that are going to reverse this disease. And so I'm going to receive comfort management. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, some people interpret that as, oh, well, but that means if I sign up for hospice, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel like that's kind of like the death sentence. And truly it is not.
Yeah,
Okay?
I think is it safe to say that that's probably a lot of people's aversion to considering hospice?
Yeah.
It's like they're committing themselves to death.
I would say so. I think that, because of the lack of understanding about hospice care, we see a lot of different patients and their diagnoses. There's patients that are on our services for a few weeks, a few days, but then there's also patients that have been on our services for multiple months, a year, couple years. It just depends on their prognosis and how quickly their disease advances.
Yeah.
But another thing that a lot of people do not recognize is that you're actually able to graduate off of hospice.
Yeah.
Just because you go on hospice does not mean that it's the end all be all. Your illness could turn a corner. You could improve your treatment that you may be receiving with palliative care alongside palliative care. Say you're going through chemo or something and you're on palliative care services. It starts to work and improve your status. You're actually able to come off of services and then go back on them. It's not as common, but we do see it and we have seen it.
We threw a graduation party for somebody not that long
Yes,
ago.
Did you?
Oh,
yes.
What was that like?
Oh, it was incredible.
Yeah.
I didn't get to personally be part of it, but one of our incredible nurses and social workers that I think they brought Megan out to be part of it. This individual had come on hospice. It looked like things were going in a pretty rough direction for them. But as they came on, all of a sudden they started gaining weight. They started eating real well. They hadn't been walking, and they got up and started walking and doing all this. And we're like,
goodness.
wow, your picture's changed a lot. And so when we said, we need to start having this conversation about graduating off of hospice service, they said, wait, I'm graduating? Do I get a diploma? and our nurse and social worker took that, and they worked with the family and the patient, and they threw a party. And I think they got a diploma of graduation.
Yeah, we created
really
a
cool.
whole certificate, had balloons, took pictures, and that was awesome. That's something that you don't see a lot, and it was really cool to see.
Yeah,
man, what a special moment, not just for them. I mean, gosh, I can't imagine, but also for the hospice care workers themselves. Like, oh my gosh, because you said you don't see that a lot, so I can only imagine that kind of work. First off, is rewarding, yes, but I can imagine it probably wears on one's psyche and one's spirit, and so to be able to see that even every once in a while has got to be a rejuvenation.
Definitely.
One of the things that we try to help people to get a grasp on is that hospice isn't really all about dying and death. Hospice is actually about living.
Yeah.
The work of hospice is about helping that person at whatever stage they are at, wherever they're at, however they're feeling, to maximize and have the best, most fulfilling life that they have with whatever time they have left.
Yeah.
Whether that's days or months or years, or whether they even graduate off hospice, we want to help that person to feel like what is most important to them is fulfilled.
Yeah.
And so that's where we get to meet people where they're at. For some people, that might be, I want to do one more drive around the lake, and I haven't been able to get out of this bed in 2 months. How do we help that person get into a car so they can go with their loved one on a drive around the lake, right? And we try to do everything we can to support that wherever it's possible.
Yeah.
Another misconception too, I think, is the age. People usually think that hospice is just for the elderly, but that's definitely not the case. I mean, we've taken care of patients right after they're born, children, pediatric type patients.
I was thinking about that too. I mean,
young adults.
Gosh.
Middle age, and then even, the elderly, of course, but it's for anyone that has a life-limiting illness. So it's not just, geriatric. And so that is a big, I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm not ready for hospice, or I'm not there yet, and that tends to have them kind of wait until the last minute.
Yeah.
Where there isn't that education and discussion with families, where we'd love to see that improve, where people could, talk openly about, well, okay, but say you were to get cancer and it's a life-limiting prognosis. What do you want at the end of life? How do you want to be comfortable? What are the care and just all those factors of end-of-life care at the end. So, but I mean, I think that's a big one too.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I was curious about that, and I can only imagine how much that pulls on the heartstrings.
Definitely.
The younger the patient, the more so, I think. That's a little bit of a segue into community-based, because we're talking about perception about this. So Megan, your work with the community, I'm just very curious, how do I word this? How has the subject of death and just its involvement, because to me, the reason I'm trying to think of verbiage here is because to me, with my experience personally, and to anyone who's lost a loved one, they'll understand this as well, and you two I know will understand this, death is very much a part of life. It's part of the piece of life. It's not the end of life. I don't even look at it that way anymore. Like, it's part of it. In some ways, it's the beginning of it. What I'm curious about specifically is how the concept of death and its involvement in life has affected your conversations with people regarding hospice care.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, I mean, usually when I'm out in the community, it's in a very public setting. So usually when I'm speaking with the community, alongside, we also have a hospice care liaison that goes out into the community as well. When we are speaking to the community, we tend to get a lot of thank yous of thank you so much for taking care of our loved one, which we love to hear.
Yeah.
But in terms of educating the community, we don't necessarily have those opportunities when we are in a public setting. So then we have events that tend to help educate. Like this upcoming week, we're doing a talk at the Kroc Center about hospice. We've had in-services with facilities and caregivers and been able to educate in that sense. And those are so important. I feel like, we are nonprofit hospice. Our goal is to be there for the community like they are for us. And so I feel like having those opportunities to educate the community members about end-of-life care, about death, about, the different aspects of what all goes into our services is extremely important. And so we've tried to integrate that more into what we do.
What's that like when you have events and stuff? I mean, what are some how do people start a conversation with you? How do you guys start a conversation? I imagine hospice care is, like we were discussing earlier, something a lot of people know about because of personal experience, but also I imagine you probably get the avoidant walk by sometimes too.
Definitely.
Like what are some of those interactions like?
Well, usually, I mean, it just comes down to the education of it or their experience. Perhaps it was traumatic and they're just not ready to talk about, end of life care. Perhaps they're dealing with their own diagnosis and they're not ready to talk about it. But I think we just make sure that our approach is open, it's informative, but it's never, pushing our care or our services on anyone in the community. I think that's the most important part, is to know that we're there for the community when they're ready for us. I mean, of course, we want to educate and provide, as much as we can, but at the same time, everyone's on their own timeline of how they would like to, handle end of life care. So I think that that's definitely important. But sure, we get some interesting conversations. There's a lot of, I don't know if I'd call it denial, but there's a lot of just kind of brush it off. Mm-hmm. My approach is just listen, see what their interaction is. I mean, when we are out there informing people of what we do, it's usually a lot of thank yous. It's a lot of, because we are pretty well known in the community. I mean, we've been a nonprofit hospice since 1981 in our area. Mm. And so a lot of people are familiar with who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I just try to make sure that when we're out in the community, we're just listening to them and educating as much as they're willing to absorb.
Yeah. You mentioned denial, and it's interesting you did, because I was literally thinking about 2 seconds before you said that. I bet they deal with quite a bit of that. And I'm curious how that's affected the upfront conversations, but also after admission. Like what denial... I have experienced denial personally for different reasons, and it is reality shifting.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how much... I mean, you must have experienced a lot of interaction with that concept.
I'm sure Eric could speak on that from like a clinical level. I think, in the community, I do see that. And I think it's just, it's just a taboo topic. Not a lot of people want to talk about death.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
But when you talk about denial, when someone's admitted to hospice, of course, we see that within families, but also when someone passes away. Mm-hmm. We offer a lot of grief services to our community. We have support groups. We have a kids camp for grieving children.
Really?
We could talk about. But yeah.
Oh yeah,
so
I love talking about that.
Oh, that's fascinating.
We deal with those heavy feelings after someone passes away as well.
Yeah.
So, our nurses, our social workers, our spiritual care, our volunteers, they're all very well educated and prepared for the different types of feelings that families or patients have when they're going through this process.
Yeah.
Wow. That literally is like right into the next subject I wanted to address. It's so perfect.
We're flowing so well.
Gosh, the segues, y'all. We're just floating through town.
We're jiving. Here we go.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned, I mean, we don't speak about death much in our culture. Because of my own loss, I've done a lot of reading on this subject, on grief. And have you guys heard of Francis Weller? By any chance?
I've heard the name.
He's one of many grief experts who has written a couple of books, I believe. But he has one book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which I've referenced many times because it was a huge deal in my life reading that book. And he's on a few podcasts and things. But he just brings awareness to the American problem of really avoiding this topic
of grief,
and therefore death and loss and whatever it is that affects your experience with grief. And so it seems like people want to escape that rather than accept it and lean into it. Yeah. And in American culture, we see a lot of things that are indicative of that, such as, plastic surgery on the rise. There's a lot of products that you can get to look younger and to kind of prolong things. There's supplements you can get. There's all kinds of stuff that really kind of give you this idea of lengthening your life, which is fine, It's great. Be healthy. I love the focus on health and things. We could talk about that, nutrition. But I noticed this common through line of really just avoiding the idea of the end of life or the finality of it is just sat on as much as possible. So I'm wondering how you think these topics of aging, death, grieving become so avoided culturally. I know it's different for everybody, but yeah.
I think that, in just my opinion, I think that there's just that fear of unknown. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their own belief system, everything like that, but I think, we don't know.
The end of the day. We can believe
what we want, but at the end of the day, there's no certainty of what happens. And I think that there's just a lot of scared feelings for a lot of people that they just don't know what will come next after you pass away.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I had the opportunity to live in another country for a while that was of, I'll say, a much lower socioeconomic climate than what we live in here in the United States.
Sure.
And so the kinds of things that caused worry or concern, or what was culturally practiced in that kind of a setting, was so different than what we experience here. To be fair, I feel like we live in an environment where things are pretty easy.
Oh, yeah.
We live in such a rich...
Pretty cushy. Yeah.
We live in a pretty rich environment. And I think with that comes a very natural tendency for people to become very self-centered.
Very much. Yeah.
Very egocentric, very much about pleasure. Because so much of what we have around us brings us good feelings and pleasure. We don't experience a ton of things as a society in general that bring us, that we experience hunger or pain. And I'm not talking individually. There are plenty of individuals out here there who experience this, but generally there's so much less hunger and pain and loss and things like that in our society than what other people in other countries and other climates kind of experience, that I think we take a lot of that for granted. And
very much so.
So when we're faced with aspects of human reality that are going to cause us to feel pain, loss, sorrow, all those things, we try to avoid it because we're not exposed to it as much as other people are. There are many societies out there. So to the topic of death with this, there are societies out there who still, when someone's spouse or someone's parent or someone's loved one in some way dies, they put on a black shroud and they wear that for months. So that everyone around them can see that person lost somebody dear to them. And it's actually culturally encouraged for people to go to them and say, who died?
Right.
And they sit and they listen about that loss. And it's actually encouraged for these people to grieve. They are allowed space to grieve. And it's not something that it's like, hey, you know what? They died a month ago. Are you over that yet? It's not like that, right? Whereas here in our culture, when we're faced with something difficult like that, we're so used to having what we want when we want it.
Right.
And we're so used to feeling good most all of the time that when we're faced with something like grief, loss, pain, death, we do not want to face that. We don't want to deal with it. And it's hard when we're put in a situation where we have to. And so that's one of the big things that we focus a lot on in our community engagement and in our community efforts is to try to promote opportunities for people to interact with that in ways that are as comfortable as they can be, but will also open them up to experiencing this piece of life that's so important for us to connect with. Our kids camp that we do is an incredible example of this.
Yeah, please speak on that. So that's so fascinating. And first off, before either of you do, I just wanted to point out how, I mentioned Francis Weller in his book. He points to that topic of how people would dress in black, and people often do in different countries, but not here. We used to do that here.
We used to, yes.
Wear the armband, wear the the veils.
Yep. It was a socially accepted and encouraged period of time where the idea of that is so interesting to me because that shares the load a bit. It's like by someone being there to just listen for a little while, which I've done about my mom a billion times now since she's passed. Like it's like I'm letting you carry a little bit of this, not putting it on you, but it's just easy to carry it after a bit. And anyone who's ever lost someone has been able to share and been lucky enough to share about that person, not just death, but let's say a bad breakup, let's say the end of a relationship, loss. A pet that you don't have anymore. I don't want to skip over that, man.
That's heavy stuff.
Absolutely. I had a German Shepherd for 14 years and becomes another child, and so when you experience loss and you're able to talk about it, it does share that load a bit. So I just find that interesting because he points to that in the book, and I just find that so interesting that we don't do that anymore. But please speak on this kids camp. I want to hear a bit about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, Do you want me to talk about kids camp?
I mean, we both can chime in. But
We both, okay.
We're both really passionate.
This is one of our favorite things that we do. And this is one of the cool things about being part of Hospice in North Idaho that's different than other hospice agencies. Is that we have the pleasure of being able to interact with these kind of experiences. So each year, we host a kids camp. We call it Camp Kinixu. It is a free event for all children that want to participate.
Okay.
And really the only qualifying criteria for kids is they have to be between the age of 6 and 16, and they have to have experienced a human loss of some sort.
Okay.
So that could be a parent, it could be a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, a sibling, a friend. It could be really anyone that they've lost. And what happens is, because of this environment that we live in, this place we live in the United States where we don't talk about death, what we find is that gets passed down from generation to generation. Kids are having a harder and harder time finding safe and healthy ways to process the emotions that come with loss. And so when these kids go to school, for example, and their dad just died, a month ago, and they're in school, all the kids are talking with them as if that they're in just the normal place that they've been in their whole life, the whole time they've known them.
Yeah.
But the reality is that they are in a completely different place right then.
Right.
And oftentimes these kids are in that setting and they feel isolated. They feel alone. They feel like they can't connect to anyone. They have nobody they can talk to about it. They go home and maybe their other parent that's left or their grandparent won't talk to them about these things, or when they have an emotional outburst, they're just punished rather than, let's process what you're experiencing right now. And so it can create patterns of destructive behaviors. So what we do is we bring these kids into an environment where we spend 3 days with them, talking to them about their loss. And we do this through activities and through programs and through conversations. Most of it is very fun in nature. I mean, we get them climbing rock walls. We get them drawing things. We get them smashing plates. We get them doing all kinds of activities, doing a drum circle. We get them doing things that are fun and engaging, but are designed to get them to start looking at what they're experiencing, start looking at their emotions.
And being able to relate to other children their age that are also going through a loss as well.
Right. Yeah. That peer kind of situation is really helpful.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah.
It is an incredible thing to watch. It's not like there's something life-changing that happens in those 3 days, but to just see the small incremental changes that often happen with these kids, where they come in and they're really uncertain. They don't know if they can be open and talk about these things. They might have a lot of fear. And then by the end of day 3, they're sharing, they're talking, they're laughing, they're engaging.
Yeah.
They've stepped through a door. Yeah.
They also go home and educate their parents who may be still heavily grieving and hadn't been able to help their child process because they're still going through it.
Yeah.
So we see that as well sometimes, that that the child gained all this experience and they're able to help their parents as well.
We all know how influential kids are on adults' lives.
Yes.
Massively. So
yeah.
We've also started integrating some time with their family members as part of the training. So they spend the first day with the kids, have their parents or their grandparents, whoever their guardian is, stay with them.
Yeah.
And so we actually get to do some training and teaching for those individuals as well. And that we've gotten great feedback about that. All of our community bereavement programs, like our camp, like our support groups, like our tree lighting that we're doing next month, all of these are free to the community. They're free to anyone in the community. They don't have to have been on our services, because we really feel like these are things that can benefit so many more people than just those that we had the honor and privilege of caring for on hospice care. It's anybody can come in and be a part of it.
Yeah.
And so it's a really incredible thing. We've got kids that'll come to that camp that are coming from, out of state, and their parent comes with them, or coming from another part of Idaho. And it's really neat to see that.
We have a lot of volunteers that help with it as well from the community. Some are educated as far as social workers, but also just other people with different types of jobs that have a passion for helping kids during grief. And so, we have a lot of volunteer opportunities, but camp is, definitely one of them. But
yeah. Well, that's again, perfect segues
Yeah, here
all
we go.
around here. So to end on here, this has been a wonderful conversation about hospice care work in general, grief in general, death in general, and just life as we know it, as far as how these things affect us. I mean, I've been really enjoying getting to have conversations with folks like yourselves about these heavier topics and making more light of them, because it's part of what we live in. It's part of the society and culture that we sustain. It's part of it. And so avoiding it doesn't really do us any good. And in fact, it just makes enjoying life a little bit worse, and sometimes a lot worse. So what is it that people can do to find you guys? Where do we find you? You mentioned a couple events going on here pretty soon. Talk about again real quick about the name of the hospice that you work at. I've neglected to actually bring that up until just now.
I'll do our tagline.
Yeah, do your little tagline. How can people find you and all that good stuff?
Sure. So Hospice North Idaho is the community-based nonprofit hospice providing end-of-life education and services such as palliative care, hospice care, and grief support. We also have education events, volunteer opportunities for a variety of different, you name it, we probably have a volunteer that helps with it. And then we service Kootenai, Shoshone, Benewah, and South Bonner counties currently. I said earlier, we've been around since 1981, and some of the upcoming events that we have are, we have our tree lighting ceremony that we do every December.
Woo!
Woohoo!
Christmas time! We're there, baby!
It's beautiful. It's
It is beautiful. It actually is a little bit of, I don't know if I would say somber, but it's definitely a time for reflection. Anyone that you've lost, you can come, doesn't matter the loss, even if they're not on our services, you can come and honor them. And it's just a beautiful ceremony. And then every February, we have our annual wine taste and auction, which is a fun time. It's a silent auction, live auction, a formal event at the Coeur d'Alene Resort. And,
cool.
there's...
Dress up all fancy.
Yes.
Dress
Come
up
on
fancy.
down.
Have some games. Get to taste a lot of different
Yes,
wines and foods.
wine
We
and
have a lot of
food.
different vendors that come in.
I see no problems here.
Yes, it's
none
definitely great. And all, that event benefits comes back straight to us. So it goes back into patient care.
Awesome.
So any of the fundraising money that we raise from that goes directly back to patient care. And then, we have our kids camp usually in the summertime. We have our support groups that meet monthly. And then we just have some education events that we offer, such as Embracing Death and Dying series, which is a monthly event that goes into the cultures and religions and how death is viewed in those. So that might be something for you to come check out.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I get so nerdy about stuff like that.
Oh gosh, yeah,
man.
we have great guest speakers that come and speak to that.
Yeah.
We've had people from all kinds of different faith backgrounds, Hinduism, you name it. Lots of different Christian sects. We've had Buddhism. We've had
Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, we've had lots of different backgrounds come in and speak about their perceptions of death and living and what does that look like and how does it impact the care we do. But it's also open to the community, so community members can come and learn with us.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and then in April we do we'll have our second annual Advanced Care Planning Conference, which is great for the community to just kind of start planning for what you want at the end of life and kind of talk to some people that are well educated. We had some speakers as well as like attorney that comes, explains kind of the post and the will and your last
wishes.
Wishes.
Power of attorney and all those kind of things. They help to
Trusts,
educate people
I imagine,
how that works.
Yeah. So those are just a few opportunities and events that we have. All of them are listed on our website, which is www.hospiceofnorthidaho.org. And then we also list, information, education, any opportunities we're doing in the community on our social media pages, which is Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And then,
Great.
Well, we forgot to mention a really awesome, important part as well. We have a thrift store.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Because I like to thrift.
Yeah, good stuff at the thrift store. Yeah.
There is a really cool thrift store here, Hospice of North Idaho thrift store. Where is it, guys?
So we're in Post Falls on Celtice. We're going to be changing locations next year because we can't keep the lease apparently, but we're going to be there for another little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an incredible store. All of the donated goods that we sell go back to support our charity care. Okay. And so last year, for example, in 2023, we had $180,000 of charity care that was covered by the thrift store.
Oh my gosh. So if you're listening and you gotta make a Goodwill run, pause, consider donating to Hospice North Idaho thrift store somewhere. They're local, you're supporting hospice care and hospice care workers, the entire thing. So definitely worth considering that. That's awesome. Really cool. Well, you guys are amazing, and you're very passionate about what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I think, when you were talking about opportunities of how we engage with the community, I think this is an awesome opportunity. So we just thank you for bringing light to a very special topic.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. Yeah. Well, bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We'll see you.
Thanks again for listening, guys. Remember, you can visit hospiceofnorthidaho.org for all the information regarding the events and services these folks offer, and check the show notes for more information. I always try to put that stuff down there. Our trash pickup is coming up this Sunday, November 10th. It begins at 11 o'clock in the morning. Remember to go to our Instagram at Sustainable Culture Online for details or how to find us, or you can also look us up on Facebook. There's a whole event page with all the details. Reach out at sustainableculture.online. That's where you can actually email me directly. You can ask questions. You can make requests. You can recommend guests if you would like. If you have anything to offer me as far as that goes, I'm always looking for ideas. And thanks again for listening. Please rate and review the show where it's applicable. Also a huge help in growing the audience, and it's much appreciated once again. This has been Sustainable Culture. I have been Jet. We'll see you next time.